Look at
Okay,
us.
welcome everyone. Yeah, remind me what is today's date, Tim? When I'm on my phone, I can never see my date, my time, and all that.
It's July 15th, Thursday.
Okay, so Thursday, July 15th. Welcome to the weekly briefing. Glad you could join us today. Tim and we're going to have an interesting conversation because here's the little bit of backstory to set this up. Is Tim, over maybe the past few months, I'll say, we've been talking about how the pandemic has actually been strangely a friend to many shops in the industry. And my theory is that a lot of shops have gotten stronger, and ironically, a lot of them have become more profitable. And you and I and our team started noticing, there's several, call it owners within our circle that we've seen generating a lot of profit, and they've been saving a lot of money. And all of a sudden they wake up one day and they have 7 figures in a savings account. And there's that moment of like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? That's incredible. And that's great. And that's exciting, of course, that using a roll up and a cash board and that whole routine and using the splits, of course, gets that owner there. That's awesome. But what we noticed was they didn't know what to do next. And so there was this thought of, well, was that it? Was that the whole goal? Was that the dream? Are we done now? What do I do next? And we thought, wouldn't it be fun to just ask that question somewhat rhetorically? And so, Tim, I'm asking you, if I'm an owner and I've knocked down that big goal, I wanted to have a pile of money so that I could someday retire or something like that. And then I get there maybe sooner than expected. What now? Where do I go from there?
Yeah. Right, because part of the thought was, well, if I had $1 million, I could retire. But if I'm only 40, should I? That's we're probably
Right.
thinking when I'm 60 and I have $1 million, I could retire. But at 40 and $1 million, I still have a career ahead of me. What should I be doing with this money that I have? So that's probably part of the process, and maybe the easy way of kind of digesting this question. For me, what I find is that what they're up against is this thought of what was the goal for the $1 million. And I think that's what the surprise, what that's up upon them. And they're asking us specifically is, hey, now that I have this money, should I, we'll say fill in the blank, like make my own content or, buy a building. That's a very common one I'm helping people think through right now.
Yeah.
Or Lou, maybe you could sell them your building. Maybe that's what we should be doing. Yeah.
Right.
You just had that conversation this morning.
Yeah, right. Because is there something about the desire of what the $1 million was supposed to have given us, and the want for the $1 million to help me achieve the goal, but maybe I'm not thought all the way through the goal is where they're caught off guard. And in some reality, what I think that they've discovered is that many of those goals that they would have had when they quote unquote had this $1 million, right? This $1 million question, they could have already achieved because they're managing cash flow. They didn't need a pile of money. So then the thought is like, what does this moment in time with this big asset really gain me? So there's a lot of different angles we can kind of think through and process this in it. Joel, let me just say this, like, what was when you're running the company, one, did you ever have $1 million? Did you ever feel like you got to that pile of money kind of moment? And did you have a thought of what you would do with it if you did have that money?
Well, it's like, on the one hand, I'm excited to tell you almost, and I'm also embarrassed to tell you the rest of the story, because I remember there was a moment when we had about 800,000 in savings, and my business partner and I both were like, holy cow, like, how did that happen? And then we immediately started thinking, we should buy a building. Really bad quarters. We were not managing production the way I would manage it now, because I've learned from the master. And almost all that money went away. Like, almost all of it in the span of a year was gone. And that's obviously a big regret. But I think it's interesting. What I heard you saying, Tim, was the idea of maybe there's just a bias, and it's our culture or it's our upbringing that says hitting a certain number is, few people achieve that. And if you can do that, you've really done it. You're successful. But then we never really ask what's beneath the number. Why would that even be desirable? Because I kind of heard you saying, sure, $1 million is great, but isn't $1 million just a means to an end? Well, what's the end? What's the deeper goal that's meaningful that could propel you way beyond just hoarding a pile of cash?
Yeah. And the opportunities that you're looking for, my hope is, number one, especially working with someone through business, is that they're finding those opportunities sooner than they expected. Meaning they didn't need the $1 million to build their own original content. If it's a good business move, you need a small investment, and then the business pays for itself, right? So if you thought you had to spend $1 million in cash to make an original piece of content, you basically just wasted $1 million. I wish you only had $10,000. Then you only wasted $10,000 before you realize how business really works, where it's a self-generating mechanism. Not that it doesn't take investment, but those investments always have an ROI part of it. So the expectation is if you have to spend $1 million with no ROI, that's a foolish game. And the real problems need to be understood to something deeper, bigger of how business would work for you. I think the other thing is that we'll say, like, there's a funny burden. Joel, you'll know who I'm talking about when we started talking to this one company. And they actually had in their main checking account, they had one checking account, no savings account. They had $3 million in that account. And they were losing money on projects, but they couldn't see it because the variable is so large. If they're losing even just $200,000, they could barely see the impact of that 200 grand on a project when there was a few $1 million in that account. And remember when I said to that guy, what your problem is you have to get all this money out. You need to distribute this money. And he almost panicked, like, well, then how would I control my business if I didn't have this padding of money, millions of dollars of money to make sure I'm doing it right? And I was like, well, it's cool. You just spend within the budget. Like you spend less than the client gives you. That's how you solve that problem. And I think that one little trick of moving the money to the savings account is why these clients now have that $1 million. The pandemic was good to some people, but we didn't need to keep that money around and spend it on top of spending it. We could move it over and let cash flow manage the business needs and let the gains be put somewhere else. And that's where, April 2021, they had really big tax bills and didn't know they should have been doing something else. So interesting moment to capture them.
Well, a really practical takeaway, in terms of, call it a hack, right? Is don't keep your operating account, like your checking account, just full of excess cash, because you'll get diluted at some point, right? Like no matter how big the shovel is that you shovel off of the pile still looks huge. You can't really tell that it's getting smaller every day and it's going to eventually disappear. So get a savings account, take all that money away, and have just enough in that operating account to get through each month. Because guess what? You'll start making really smart decisions called, is this business actually sustainable? Is it healthy on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? And I don't know, it's funny how the owner mindset shifts when it's not this security blanket. The money's still there, of course, you can take it from savings, but it adds that extra point of decision called, why are we dipping into savings to fund operations? Something's not right.
Yeah, so that's how you discover it. And the reason I recall that is that's almost where you and Steve with Impossible were processing, is like, wow, how could you actually retain the money? How could it not just disappear and go to any other decision without being specific on what you wanted to do with it? My other thought is that you probably didn't know what to do with the $800,000. You didn't have a dream big enough to move that $800,000 into something to double it again. So holding back that, you went backwards with your expenses in a way,
if I'm honest, I probably had just fantasies of wouldn't it be cool to own a building, because that's like my ego, that would feed my ego. Like, oh, I own a big cool building that looks cool and everyone thinks I'm cool because, you know, I have this impressive space and so forth. And yeah, it probably would have been a big mistake because I wasn't ready to get into the real estate business anyways. But anyways, the money was gone, so that decision was taken away from me.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting what when you don't give it enough thought ahead of time, you're even reactionary in what to do with big gains. Like the idea of the original content of, should I just spend on original content? That example again is not spending enough time educating yourself on where the gains are, where the money is in the original content game, right? So you could actually spend it thinking it's supposed to be done one way, and you're actually supposed to have done something else to capture those gains. So that dreaming actually should inspire you to go to get an education of what it really takes to achieve that goal. And then by having that education, you can, you know, gain ground on something that you wouldn't have recognized before. Go back to the conversation we had last week with Dominic, where Dominic, what he's done in his studio was actually to pile a bunch of dreams together into different corners, right? Like when you and I were taking a tour of his space, he's like, oh, here's my fine art room. Here's where I make my sneakers. Here's where I do my motion graphics. Here's my psych for the shoot. And that dude's not any short of dreaming. It's almost like, you know, he's taking this with him. Yeah.
You left out the tattoo station.
The tattoo station, exactly. So there's opportunity when you place it in front of you, and in which case, you know, I don't know all of Dominic's situation, but I'm guessing it wasn't like he had $1 million in cash and that's why he created those different individual places and has those different partnerships. It's that he knows there's something inside of him that wants to come out, and he's learning how to DJ, right? In order to figure out if he wants to be a DJ someday, he's putting his hands on it. And I believe all of us, if that's the scenario, all of us are sitting on $1 million, because all of us can begin the process of that education of where we're going to go and begin those smaller investments that those things can be true about us. And that $1 million value came from effort you put along the way, instead of saying, oh, when I have the $1 million, I will then go learn how to be a DJ. Like, no, you will have the $1 million because you learned how to be a DJ, not waiting for that permission.
That's so interesting. So yeah, so now I'm like, okay, so Tim, if you were going to put yourself in the shoes of the people that are here and sort of vicariously ask the question, right? What should I do with $1 million? You're basically saying, well, whether it's 100,000, 1 million, or 10 million, how would you start answering the question?
Well, so I think there's got to be some moment of truth, and this is like maybe where, you know, that community part of your life steps in, and they help you start processing what that reality can be for you. Who are you really? What are you about? You know, where do you already put your effort and actions? And just be truthful to yourself about that. Like, let's make sure we know who we are and what our best opportunities and possibilities are. And I say that because we might discover that a better result comes out of who we actually are than where most of us dream by looking at someone else. So I watch Joel travel the world. I want to be like Joel, but turns out I actually don't like to travel the world, right? So that whole, my camera just fell off. So when that thing switches on me and I have to be Tim instead of Joel in this equation, I say, oh, I know who I am. Like I do like to travel, but I travel with my family, or what I love is education and history. So I'm going to find the right opportunities to advance that part of me, and that will be more satisfying. I also think that you can educate yourself within that same community. Go talk to people that are doing that, making films, who own a building, right? Talk to Lou. Lou owns a building. Lou will tell you all that it takes to buy, sell, maintain, you know, a building, and that might inspire you to double down and go do it. It might create a reality of like, oh, that's not what I was imagining it does. So there's a first part of me that says like, we should know what our community already has processed and get ourselves out there being realistic and vulnerable and having that conversation. Do we possibly lose you? We possibly lost Joel, but I'll keep on pontificating. And I know you guys are kind of there, and if you guys want to jump in, just raise your hands or whatever. I'll be happy to throw some of your insights in here too as well. I guess my other thought of when we thought of this topic today was this idea of like, not just have an understanding of what your dream is, possibly dream bigger so you understand what the opportunities are greater than your current education level or understanding of how things would really work. But one of my convictions is this opportunity of freedom, of like what independence really means, and this desire to think that dollars get us to a certain amount of dollars can help us achieve that independence. That's a challenge for a lot of us to understand how those dollars would add up to that independence. And I think that's what we often want to process is like, what is it that I'm really trying to gain here? Joel, I'm going to try to get you back into the spotlight. Although, I think we just lost Joel.
I think he just froze again.
Yeah, me too.
In the exact same position he was the last time.
Yeah, right. He has like a very good moment that he knows how to get it in there. But Lou, share with us a second, because I see your face when I'm talking about owning a building, and I'll just say again, like a lot of people right now are sitting on some cash and recognize real estate as a possible opportunity they're looking at there. I'm going to guess for you, the answer is yes, it's been a good move over many years.
Yeah.
But now there's been an evolution in your industry, and now you're questioning, do I keep this? Do I leverage it? Do I make it into something else?
Well, that's all the right questions. When we bought the building, we had been leasing for years, but our building was being turned into condos. We were on the corner of Hollywood and Vine in what was the Broadway building, and that got converted to offices in the 80s. And then come the early 2000s, they changed them to condos. So we bought our building in 2004. And the thing that we were able to do is use SBA loan. So we got, so that really helped because we had a government guaranteed portion and then the bank portion. And then we just rode that out until we were at a point where we could refinance and do a more conventional fixed rate loan. And we refinanced at that time, and there was not that much movement because there had been, 2008, the market went down, and so you kind of ride that. We were able to refinance and use some of the cash that was really helpful, and now we're waiting for the market to rebound, the commercial market, because it hasn't rebounded from COVID because people are not moving back into their offices.
Yeah. So
it's better than it was 8 months ago, but it's not as good as it was 2 years ago. So.
And tell me, like right before you, like the idea of buying the building, what your business mind was telling you of like, this is a really good idea and why it was a good idea.
I'm trying to remember. Just, we had been in a couple of places where we built our own facilities. We built our own studios. And so we were glad to move into something that we weren't going to have to move out of and build again. So that was nice. It seemed like the right move at the time. We were looking for spaces. I mean, we were looking to buy, and we looked at a couple of different spaces. One was 2 buildings where we would occupy one and rent the other, and that was something that seemed like a good move.
Was the desire though to kind of like become a real estate mogul in a way? Like you thought, oh, I always wanted to buy real estate and I was doing that, or?
Well, we've had this discussion over many years. Is like, have we created a company, or have we created really good jobs for ourselves for 35 years? And
Right.
so this, we saw this as an opportunity to create a solid investment and business that we could sell, even if we couldn't sell us later. So that was part of it.
So it sounds like you kind of were thinking, as we encourage people, is you recognize you have an opportunity to develop an asset,
right?
And you knew that asset was going to grow and develop. So as part of that, now I'm going to guess, as the economy has changed and work situations have changed, you're looking at that as, is it an asset or is it our business? Like, do I need that asset? Can I separate myself from it? Is this the right time to get in or out of that deal?
I mean, we functioned just fine remote for the last year. And right now, as we're discussing going back, I mean, there's a lot of hesitancy, not from employees, but from me in particular. It's like, well, now I'm really set up in my home. I have my own office and everything here, and it's easier for me to work from home. So
yeah, that's cool.
And as recording equipment has changed, people don't need rooms like we used to. You don't need these big acoustic things. People are doing more and more stuff. I mean, we never see voiceover talent. They have their own studios, or they set themselves up in their closet, and that's been going on for 15 years. I mean, we haven't seen anybody in our studios hardly at all in years. So it's just that the nature of technology has changed, whether we need that building in that way.
Yeah, what I appreciate about the perspective you're giving us is that, so a lot of people believe, oh, I've achieved it. I could grow or reinvest the money I've received from my business into a new asset. And you would agree that's a good move. The key there is recognizing it's separate from what you do, and understanding that part of the dream. That's where, like, someone should talk to Lou if you want to understand how the real estate game really plays itself out. And the real estate game is not the motion design, graphic, editorial business that you're in, sound business in your case. That's a totally different need. And as that technology evolved, you should know when and how to separate yourself from it so you can leverage two different assets, if that's what you want to get into.
We did create a separate corporation for the building. So our company rents the space from our other company that owns the building.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful too.
So Joel, I would guess too, like, thanks Lou for sharing that. Joel, I'd guess too that in your case, when you're looking at your pilot money, because this is the next thing that people think about, is like, oh, this is the chance I have to hire, fill in the blank, that new creative director, that salesperson, that production line or whatever that is, or maybe go from motion design to live action. There's all these other things people process inside their business. And then from your experience, you recognize, like, yeah, but that could also just become a big expense, a whole, right? And this $1 million dream that you have of, like, oh, I will gain whatever that would is, capabilities, influence, I don't know, more revenue streams, whatever that is. If you don't clearly identify it, you really just created a big hole to put money into, and without a lot of ROI.
Yeah, I mean, the expression that I used to say, I still hear a lot of owners say it, is I grew and grew and was sort of chasing that more money thing or more fame, which is part of what I was looking for. And you end up building a machine that has to be fed. And so sometimes it's like the success almost becomes your own worst enemy. It becomes a ball and chain, because I remember when we were doing $5 million a year, guess what? That sounds awesome, right? Until you say, oh my God, I have to go out and earn $5 million every year. Like that was a huge burden. So it sounds great, but on the other side of it, but something you said, Tim, that I thought was really insightful. If I heard you right before my,
if it was
Zoom
insightful,
died.
You heard me right.
Okay. Well, what I heard you saying was this principle that I would call, a lot of us have goals that we're trying to achieve, and we're trying to achieve them because we think we should. And it's interesting how once psychologically you actually check off all of those should boxes, and you start moving into no, I just want it. I want it because I want it. And that's okay. And give yourself permission to dream. What if you just could have life the way you want it? What's the big, beautiful thing that you desire? when you're working from a place of want and desire rather than just from a should, I think your brain changes.
Yeah, I think so too. There's also like the permission granted part of that equation, right? It creates the almost like a removal of we'll say that what was holding it back. You had maybe falsified all these rules that need to be true before the next thing could be true. And you can give yourself permission sooner to make that true, regardless if those precursors don't exist. What I also think happens is once you learn that part of it, you might actually change the way you dream. When my brain shifts, it's not just the dream made my brain shift, but my dreams shift because I understand something differently.
Well, there's an exercise that I like to go through. I'm going to do this with one of my clients on our next call, where we actually envision the life where all of the shoulds are done. There's no more ought tos, there's no more shoulds, like you've accomplished everything. Now what do you want to do? And it's a really provocative question because it gets to something much deeper. And then of course the next provocative question is, okay, well then let's start being that today. Like, let's just go create that future.
Yeah. And don't let the past or someone else's past that you've been witnessing from a distance determine what your future is going to be. So one thing I've started to realize is that and I like to say now is like the television that I fell in love with and wanted to be part of was already gone before I got started.
Interesting.
But as a bystander, I was trying to recreate something that I had witnessed from the side. But when I got involved, there's an evolution in television, right? There's a new thing happening that I could take advantage of. But if I wanted the old stuff to be true, it's already disappeared, and I'm basically fighting a fight I can't win. So that's to tough. Me, like that's what I want people to engage with. Opportunity is the one that's actually in front of them, not the ones that they wanted to be true. But to that point, you also have to make those things be true. Yeah, exactly. Please don't be Uncle Rico. But you also have to make those opportunities become true, right? So you have to have the tattoo guy in the corner. We're gonna have this metaphor for the rest of our life right now. You have to have the tattoo guy in the corner in order to make yourself a creative space, right? But what comes out of the creative space might be different than why you got started. And I think that's the millionaire in your mind, regardless of what's in your bank account. And that's probably how to solve the $1 million question, is to know what that independence is or that opportunity is way before it shows up. And so hopefully someday you have $1 million in your checking account, and hopefully the next day you don't, because you put it out to work for you and it's actually growing you and your dreams and your opportunities, and not just it frozen, 2 million, 3 million. I think we know people with $4 or $5 million sitting in a savings account that have no bigger dream than collecting it, and it's not working for them. And we want people to know, like, oh, you're going to have to get this stuff moving, or it becomes worthless.
That was like a really good benediction.
What do you know? Hey, look, it's time. It's been 30 minutes. It's a perfect wrap up.
Exactly. Well, why don't you thank everyone, since I can't see who all was here, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, as always, we just appreciate being part of it. Lou, thanks for jumping in while Joel fell off, so I had someone to talk to.
Yes, thanks, Lou.
But hopefully we're just, as always, we exist so you can thrive in business, life, and career. And as we see patterns and hear people processing, we just want to get these thoughts out loud to you. And hopefully today's thoughts challenge you, help you ask different questions, make you want to inspire to do something more, or just yell at us. Wherever that is, feel free to join us in RevCommunity and put those thoughts there. We'd love to process them more with you. Joel, safe travels to you. You and Emma have a great vacation together, driving up the one really sweet time. And until next week, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next Thursday for our weekly briefing.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.